Hi, and welcome to the Anti-Waffle podcast of Em and Pixie.
Woohoo!
And together we'll try to talk about research without any gobbledygook. Each episode we'll be talking to a researcher who will discuss the work they're doing, looking at why this research is important and asking how did they get into this field. We hope that it will be informative and interesting and bring a bit of the academic world into the real world. Today we have Dr. Matthew Winning, who's a research associate for UCL Energy Institute and UCL Institute Sustainable Resources. Thank you so much for being here and for talking with us today.
Not at all. Lovely to be here.
Thank you. Would you like to start by telling us a bit about your research?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am I'm an environmental economist. That is my training, which means I try to look at how you can apply economics to actually make the environment better, make the planet better. But I do lots of stuff on climate change policy. So looking at how, rather than like why is the climate changed, it's more like how do we solve the problem going forward? Like how are things going to happen over the next, say, like 10 years or 20 years or like out to the end of the century, and how do we change our energy and how we use things in order to, keep the environment in a healthy condition. That's roughly what I do.
So, first stupid question of the podcast. So, when you say the economics of it, do you more sort of like look at the financial cost of and what it costs us and what it would cost us to get the world back in order?
Yeah, I'd say roughly. Yeah, exactly. But not so much, I guess. I do some stuff on like the financial sector and stuff, but also more like, what's happening to the costs of different technologies. What is the supply chain? So if you change how you drive cars, so if cars go from being, petrol cars and diesel cars to electric cars, what is how does the economy adjust to that? So you have, supply chains where all of a sudden you've got batteries instead of, petrol stations and things like that. And so what are the sort of changes that we will see going forward to the economy, and how will that impact, the average person, and how will it impact different people's jobs or different sectors, or how things are produced? So it's very much about change, like how do things change, and how will that then impact not just that one impact, but how will that then impact the kind of wider system? I guess is what we're thinking about.
And would you also be looking at whether it's working, whether those impacts, the outcome is working? For example, I know that there's been a couple of articles, hasn't there, about stopping packaging in supermarkets, but is then that having a knock-on effect? Is it not actually having the desired effect we want, where we save the environment and use less plastic because people are, I can't remember the outcome of the article, but it was something like people were then using more plastic to carry it home or something like that. I need to go look at the article.
But I get what you mean. Yeah, it's exactly. It's those sort of wider effects that you perhaps don't think about when you put a policy in place. You think, we'll tax this more, but then you actually have to think about, well, if we do that, then what happens elsewhere, and how do things react in a much wider system that you maybe didn't think about initially. And so we do we do a bit of that sort of like working out if seeing if things worked, but it's more kind of, I'd say before that, it's more like advice on, we're trying to give better advice on what we think will be the types of impacts that you'll see if you implement this type of policy to help the environment.
Because it's like when they first started talking about recycling, and they were saying, you must wash everything out. And then so I was thinking, so we're using another resource, the water, that they're telling us they need to be careful with to try and save the other resource of all the plastic in the world. And it's like, how do you work out that balance?
Exactly. Yeah. And that sort of, the complexities of that is what we try to look at a bit more on a day-to-day basis, because you actually have more, it isn't as simple as saying we have this one thing and we need to do that, but that one thing is often trades off against, as you say, another resource or something like that. But then there's other occasions where it doesn't even trade off. There's a benefit to, if you do that, then it actually benefits another resource as well, or another area as well. For instance, with climate change, we want to reduce emissions from, say, transport again. So you stop, as many cars on the road, and that actually reduces air pollution, and people's health improves in cities, for instance. And so there's a benefit there of you're reducing global emissions, which is stopping, the planet warming at such a rate, and you're improving people's health at the same time.
And improving the tourism because the city is not as dirty, and
there's lots of benefits to it, and but then it's working out, roughly the scales of those as well, and trying to I guess most of the work is like trying to inform policy maker, people that would make decisions on this, like government and sometimes companies, how we think things will happen if this is introduced or that's introduced, but also a bit of like, well, what do we think is going to happen in the future overall? There's quite a lot of, I'd say, so my original training was in macroeconomics, so it's very much like the big picture, kind of more country level scale, but thinking about what is the trend for the country, what's going to happen at this level. So I do research on, in terms of the climate change stuff that I've done. I had a paper out last year which looked at the Paris Agreement and what the impact of that might be in terms of how technology, like in terms of the costs of meeting the Paris Agreement. So if technology costs keep coming down in a world where you're trying to achieve more, then the costs are actually about the same as a world where you're not trying to achieve more, and the costs don't come down because you're not putting so much effort into the technologies that you would need to. And so actually it's sort of just the piece of research was just saying, that there's dynamics at play here where if you try to achieve a certain world, there's benefit. It's not the same. You can't hold everything constant and compare it to a world where you're not trying to achieve that goal. There's going to be differences in the two, and actually, it's sort of much of a muchness, if I'm honest, in terms of the cost of doing something about it, and that's only on the sort of like what we would call mitigation costs. So the costs of implementing new technologies and trying to do stuff. And none of that even includes the costs that climate change will have, the impacts. And so that piece of research is essentially saying, well, doing something about it or not doing something about it, there's not actually that much of a difference. But in terms of the impacts that you're going to feel if you don't do anything about it,
then you've got to,
then it's going to be huge.
Regardless of the cost, we've got to do something, haven't we?
Essentially, and it's trying to work out that sort of, on a scale of how much are we doing, and what sort of cost will that be, and when are we doing it is the other question that we're interested in, because if it depends when do you put the effort in. If you put the effort in now, or do you wait a little bit longer, and what's the timing of the trajectory in terms of trying to keep the costs as low as possible and smooth, so that you don't all of a sudden shut down all industry overnight and everybody loses their that's one way of doing it, but it's a very dramatic way of doing it. And so we're looking at, well, what's the smoothest way of sort of transitioning from where we are now to where we need to be, and what are the costs of that transition.
And are they listening to you?
I was just about to ask that.
I think so. At the moment, you've seen in the UK, certainly in the last year, the UK's government's commitment has gone up to a net zero by 2050 target, which wasn't the case before. It was an 80% reduction compared to 1990 levels, and it's now essentially 100% reduction.
Oh wow!
And that's a bit of a change, because that's sort of it wasn't really discussed a huge amount until the last couple of years, and I think people realised that we need to start taking the lead, and that's I think it's a good starting point, certainly within the industry and people that work on this area. I think it's a bit of a step change, and it's meaning that we're asking questions about the heart. Reducing the emissions in the UK by about 80% is very difficult. But we sort of were like, but we roughly know how we might do this. But it means that we can ignore that really hard final 20% because we don't know how to do that. And now everybody's like, okay, now we need to also really think about how to do that as well. So I think and that's good. I think it's a really good thing. And I don't think that would have happened without the kind of research that's suggested that actually we do need to be hitting, going for much tougher targets in order to sort of keep within safe limits of climate change, and also to kind of lead the way and show that we are, that it's possible to do this sort of.
So do you think if we reach for a 100% target, then there's more chance that we'll reach the 80%?
Exactly. Absolutely. It's all about ambition, I think, in that instance, and we.
So we just say, well, at least we tried.
Yeah. And so it's what what is your level of ambition? What are you trying for? And the worry is that if you only try for 80%, you end up at 60% or something. Yeah. But if you try for 100%, then maybe you do achieve it, or maybe you don't. But I think you would achieve a good amount.
Push harder.
Yeah. So it's about kind of pushing. But we're very much, there's not a huge amount of time left if we're going to kind of stabilise things. Pushing harder is very much necessary.
I think this is the mildest winter I've ever been in.
Yep.
In my nearly 55 years, and it's just like it's. How can you deny that there's we've got an issue here? It's mild in England.
I know. I was in Scotland. I was in Scotland for Christmas and New Year, and it was easily the mildest I've ever experienced.
Right.
There, I was expecting. I took all my coats up with me. Didn't even need my gloves or my hat. Walking around on New Year's Day, and I was just like, having to undo my jacket because it was too hot, and I was like,
crazy.
This is just. It's nothing I had never really experienced before.
So, sorry again. What is the process? So when you're sort of like looking at like the economics of climate change, do you like look at one particular suggestion of, well, let's start, like charging people for the plastic bags? And then do you look at that one thing and then see what the shoot-offs are from that, or what?
Yeah, normally it's sort of one specific policy or question that people are wanting answered.
Yeah.
And it's much easier to give them a good answer if you focus on one thing.
Yeah.
Because then you can understand the dynamics of that thing. The problem is in real life, there's hundreds of things all happening at the same time.
Right.
But if you put that into the sort of analysis that we do, it's very hard to discern what's causing what.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Because you're going, well, we've changed 100 variables in our model.
Yeah.
We don't know, and this is what comes out. But you're like, well, and then how would you work back from that? So what we do tend to do is change one thing at a time and look at how that changes the system. Mm-hmm. And then you might say, well, given that this does this and this does this, we're expecting that if you did change these maybe three things at the same time, this might be the rough. Yeah. But you can only know that by doing it one at a time rather than trying to consider everything, which is really hard to do.
Yeah.
And can you give us an example of anything you're working on at the moment?
So we just finished a piece of work on how the financial sector needs to change, because it needs to start including more risk on climate change into the sort of calculations that companies are making. And one of the interesting pieces that we did, we looked at sort of what level of investments are required over the next 30 years to achieve different targets, in terms of whether it's a 2 degree world we're aiming for, or a 1.5 degree temperature increase that we're aiming for by the end of the century. And one of the interesting things I think there that we looked at in that piece of research was how important finance actually is to countries achieving their own targets, because a lot a lot of assumptions are made that there's a reduction in, say, the cost of a technology, like, say, solar power. So solar power is reducing the cost quite a lot at the moment and has done over the last 10 years. But there's an assumption that plays out the same in each country. So in the UK, well, the UK doesn't use a lot of solar, but say, France or Spain or something like that is the same as somewhere in sub-Saharan Africa. But actually, the cost of finance is much higher in Africa because there's more risk involved with, the way financial companies do their risk calculations. They don't know if they're going to get the same payback from certain countries as they would in other countries because maybe the institutions in that country aren't quite the same, and they don't know if there's more corruption or other things like that mean actually that reduction in cost of solar power benefits developed countries more than it benefits developing countries. Right. And so people want to go, well, Africa, it's hugely, it's hot. Why don't we just have solar panels everywhere? And you go, well, actually, it's because one of the elements is that you need to help reduce the cost of financing technologies in Africa, as well as getting the costs. Getting the cost down is one thing, but there's the whole financial sector that is
because everything takes money to institute to bring change. Means money.
Yeah. And it's going to be different on different countries depending on where they are as well, isn't it? What other matters they have of concern. Solar panels may not be the top priority in Africa.
Food.
I mean, you see Australia as well at the moment. Australia obviously has a huge amount of sun.
Yeah.
And solar power, I think, is taking off and has taken off there to some extent, but it's a huge coal exporter. And so they are interested, and they're not. They want to keep coal going as long as they possibly can, because
their whole
a lot of their economy is based on it.
Their economy is based on it. Yeah.
So it's a really hard. Yeah. These are the more complex things rather than just being like the cost of the technology's down.
Yeah.
We've solved the problem. It's one part of the problem, but there's a lot of. So one thing that we might look at in terms of the work that we do would be kind of like, well, how important is coal to Australia's economy, and what would happen if you transitioned solar towards solar from coal, and
which of course they've got to transition, haven't they?
Well, you think so?
Yes, I have decided. No, they have to transition. Coal's not going to be there forever, is it?
No, but then I suppose that's what Matt's saying is how many people's jobs are affected by this? Exactly. How many lives are going to change? There needs to be a system to.
So it's about looking at rather than looking at whether they should transition, but how are they going to transition? Surely that should be the question.
I mean, surely. It should be. You're very optimistic.
That was fixing.
Which is good. No, exactly, and it's very much about that transition. Is really key at the moment, I think, because you have to have something in place for moving from one sector like oil and gas to more of a renewables based economy. It's going to affect people, and so I think people unfortunately don't. The average person, probably even the person that's really for renewables and stuff, don't engage with the problem at a level where they're actually thinking about, but people's jobs are affected here, and people's lives who are dependent upon this are impacted. And so how we've seen it with coal mining in the past, and have we learned those mistakes? And our government's putting things in place to help transition places from one industry to another industry, and it's really important and probably difficult. And I think some governments do see that, and other governments don't see it, and that's.
I think they had the same conversations with the slave trade. It's like, but it's the economy. The whole economy is based on the slave trade. How can we get rid of slaves? How can we not trade slaves? Because it's going to affect this. It's going to affect the amount of jobs that we everyone's going to go bankrupt, but it still had to change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I did. I saw someone on Twitter this week posted something very similar. They were taking the same arguments that are getting used now about climate change and jobs, and we're like, these are these quotes that are the exact same thing from I can't remember, like 150 years ago or something. And I read a couple of them and was like, that's the same argument.
It is.
It sounds hugely complex, and you've got these big variables to play with. I presume that you've got collaborations and many groups of you getting together to discuss this.
Yeah, the projects are always quite varied in terms of partners. Sometimes the projects that I've worked on are UK based, so it's different UK institutions working on very kind of UK focused topics, and then some of the other ones are much more global in terms of I've done some work with China. So one thing as well that I've been looking at, slightly not really related to climate change as much, but more related to the idea of a circular economy. So it's kind of like, rather than, it's basically more recycling, but also reusing and designing things that we know we're going to reuse once they come to the end of their life cycle.
So like thinking that from the very beginning.
Exactly, yeah. So
how can we recycle this?
Yeah, and it's built into the whole chain, rather than being like, we do this and then we use it and then we throw it away.
What do we do with this now?
Yeah.
We've got loads of these. What do we do with them? Yeah,
exactly. So the circular economy is a thing that we're it's a kind of buzzword that's come about, I guess, in the last kind of maybe 10 years or so. But it's very much about the idea of changing the economy to be much more efficient in terms of the resources that it's using. And so one thing that we were looking at with China as well, in terms of the steel industry. So globally, China produces about half of the world's steel, and that's changed kind of over the last 20 years. But we were looking at, well, actually steel is quite recyclable. You can use steel again, and so all of that steel that China's produced over the last 20 years, what's going to happen to it soon once it comes out of production, or at the end of its life from cars or other things that use a lot of steel, and how can you reuse that, and what are the sort of approaches in China that could be used to up their use of recycle, because they don't actually recycle much steel at the moment. So how could we, what levels could they go to in China, sort of, so that's very much at the start of a piece of research. We've only been doing it for a couple of years, but I think it's a really interesting thing. But that meant collaborating with people from China as well, and other people around the EU on those sorts of issues.
Exciting.
Yeah,
that's amazing. Okay, so do you want to tell us about how you got to this current position?
Oh wow! How did I get here today? My original degree was a law and economics degree, and it's a very hard word for people to understand in my Scottish accent. Law. People used to think that I said war and economics. I was like, I guess that could be a degree. So yeah, I sort of specialised in two things originally, and then from that I worked for an investment bank for a year. I worked for BlackRock, who are now the largest asset manager in the entire world, who announced very recently that they're going to be doing more on climate change, which I think is a very welcome announcement. But yeah, so I did that for a year, and then I went back and I did a master's degree in economics as well. And during that time, so during my undergraduate, I did a international environmental law course. I was sort of like, oh, this is really interesting. It was the first course that I'd ever done at university where I was like, oh, this is actually super interesting. I didn't know any of this stuff, and it seems very relevant to an enormous problem.
Yes.
And then I did when I was doing my master's degree, I did another environmental economics course, and I found that super interesting. And so then I was like, well, I'll just do my dissertation on something that is on this topic, that topic, because and I think there's a really good piece of advice I would always give people, that if they're doing a master's or even an undergraduate, what do you enjoy?
Yeah.
Just do that. because it might be the only time in your life
do it.
you get to do something you enjoy. And if you find that you enjoy it and you're good at it, then that might be your career.
Key to life. Key
Exactly.
to a happy life. Get paid to do what you love to do.
Exactly. So I did that, and I did a dissertation on the European Union emissions trading scheme, and really enjoyed it. And then off the back of that, there was a PhD that was looking for candidates to apply, and I applied to that. I only applied to one PhD and got the PhD. And went, oh, great, okay. And that was in Glasgow, which is very near from where I'm from, or a lot of my family are from. So I went back there and did a PhD in sort of looking at UK climate change policy. So the overall kind of, I guess, emphasis of the PhD was so when I started the PhD in 2008-9, so 2009 was the first year that the UK introduced the Climate Change Act, which was the first ever piece of legislation, national legislation on climate change in any country.
Wow.
And so it was like right at the start of that, and so I thought, well, I'll look at that from an economic perspective and what's going to happen because of the UK deciding that it's going to do stuff on climate change properly. And so that was kind of the PhD. Some bits of kind of more policy discussion, and some bits of like modelling, and looking at a carbon tax for the UK and what the effect of that might be. And so I did that, and then I finished my PhD on the Thursday, and I started a job at UCL in London on the Monday.
Brilliant.
And I've been here ever since, and that was 7 years ago. It's a long time.
Excellent.
So I've been doing various projects here since then. It's flown by very quickly. And so I've worked on numerous things over that time. And at the same time as that, I have also... So when I started my PhD, about 9 months into my PhD, I needed something else to take me away from thinking about climate change all the time and to get away from my parents. And so I started doing stand-up comedy at that time as well.
Wow, that's so cool.
Then I kept doing that as a kind of hobby, but it sort of was... It sort of went from being a hobby to kind of semi-professional, I guess. I was sort of making some...
So with the first stand-up comedy, was it... Because I know now you talk about sort of like from a climate change perspective, more from your research, but when you first started it, was it just straight...
It was it was me trying not to talk about climate change. So no, when I started, it was very much, I just thought, I'd like to see if I can do this. It was a hobby, something else. And that kept going for. It's still going, and it kept going for quite a while without having any relevance to my work whatsoever. And I did occasionally. I tried to talk about climate change. I wrote maybe like a couple of jokes, but I found it very hard to do. And because it's a very serious matter. Exactly.
We're all going to die.
Exactly. And I was like, I don't know how do you make this relevant to people? It's really hard. And so I kept doing both for, I guess it would have been 8 years. I'd got reasonably good at comedy because I'd been doing it quite a lot for quite a long time. And then I had written. Previously to that, I'd written 2 like full comedy shows, I would say, like hour-long comedy shows in 2015 and in 2016, not really about climate change, but I tried, in the second one, I tried to sort of talk about it. But I thought people don't really want to be like, have this, put down their throats or anything, so I'll try and do it, but in a very sort of light and, skirt around the topic a little bit. And I found that the reviews the show was okay. I think I wrote it too quickly, to be honest. But the reviews were like, he didn't really talk. I was expecting it to be more hard hitting or more like I expected him to go into more detail about it. And so the reviews were the first show that I did got reviewed very well. The second show that I did got reviewed, I'd say, very averagely.
Yeah.
And so my reaction to that was like, okay, you want something hard?
I'll give you hard.
Here's an hour about climate change. And so I genuinely think it was it was sort of a combination of that and me being like, I've done two shows already. I guess I need to find something to talk about that I know about. Like, and so it just sort of came to that time where I went, well, I'm going to give this a shot. And I didn't know before I did it whether I could make it funny, really, or whether it would work, or whether people would be interested. I just went, I'm just going to do this. Let's see what happens. And so 2017, I wrote a show and took it to the Edinburgh Festival, and the reaction was really good. Pretty much from everybody went, oh, this is really super interesting and quite entertaining at the same time. And I went, oh, and so I'd been so busy writing the show and doing a full-time job at the same time that I didn't really have the headspace to sort of think, well, how would people react to this, or is there a benefit to doing this, or any of that sort of stuff. And it was only after I'd maybe done the show I'd been doing it every day for maybe like a week and a half or 2 weeks, that I then went, I relaxed, because I went, I think it's good, I think it's good, I think things are okay, it's going well. This seems to be quite useful for people, and so then I started actually sort of trying to understand what I was doing, what were the things that I was doing that people were finding, getting something from, and so so basically my comedy career and my academic career crashed together in about 2017. And it made my life a lot simpler.
And you've been successful, haven't you? 'Cause you've done the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, and you've been on. I've heard you on shows like the Now Show, things like that. So and it's really relevant. And
and people need to, and I think that's the thing. It's that this work is really relevant to people. People want to know about it, but trying to do it in a way which doesn't just depress people. And isn't the same thing that they've heard all the time is actually hard to do. So, it's been good. There's a good amount of interest in people saying, "Oh, we'd like you to come and talk about this at our events," because our events are really hard.
Make it light-hearted.
And so everybody wants a bit of we all need a little bit of a break from this. Could you come and do that?
We're all going to die, but could you come and
exactly? Could you? Exactly.
Die laughing.
So it's been good, and I think it benefits. The two things I would say that it benefits is, one, it's a good way of reaching people that can't normally be reached by it, and giving them information in a very simplified way, in a way which they don't feel is you lecturing them as well. So as a messenger, I think you come across when you're doing comedy as quite likeable and more
I'm on your side.
Exactly.
Relatable,
and if you can be slightly self-deprecating, people go, oh yeah, I like this, but it's just it's just that you're sort of humanizing yourself, and so I think it's really good from that perspective, from a communication perspective. It's really good at getting the message across to people. People retain information when they're happier.
It's memorable, isn't it?
Exactly. It's really memorable, and so that, I think, it's great as a communication tool. It's also beneficial for the people that, as you say, that work on this topic and that are we'd quite like to laugh. We need a break from this as well. We find this hard, and so coming together to kind of talk about it and experience it, but in a way that's different to what you normally experience it, I think is beneficial for those. So so far, it's only been kind of really positives that I've found from doing it.
Excellent.
Anything else coming out? Any other shows?
So I'm doing my show in London from the 21st to the 23rd of February this year.
Oh, cool.
At the Vaults Festival at Waterloo. So there's 3 nights there. And then I'm taking it on tour around the rest of the UK for the rest of the year. Doing shows in Bristol, Cambridge, Glasgow, Edinburgh, Newcastle, Birmingham, Exeter, some other places that I can't.
We'll put a link. We'll put a link.
I'm doing that, and then there's kind of lots of other projects.
So if you could sum up a short paragraph sentence about why your research is important to the public, please.
So the research that I do is important to the public because we are all affected in some way by the changes that are happening to the planet in terms of what mostly the human impact is on the planet. And so I think the research I do tries to engage in quite a lot of complexities that are maybe a bit harder to understand, and hopefully then communicating those complexities to the public makes them understand that these are quite complicated issues that are quite hard to solve, and gets them feeling like that they can be part of the solution as well to what's happening, because it's very difficult when you have big things like climate change and people think, well, this is going to affect my life but I can do nothing about it. Mm-hmm. And actually trying to explain to people how you can do something about it, or how politicians, what they need to do about it, or what mm-hmm. companies should be doing about it is important, because at the end of the day, companies are run by people and the government is run by people, and we're all in this together, and so it's just about everybody trying to understand what's going on and trying to solve it together.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time.
Not at all. Thank you for having me.
It's been brilliant.
Absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you for everybody for listening. We'll put links up on our website, which is the antiwafflepodcast.wordpress.com, and our Twitter account, which is @antiwafflepod. And please do get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. Bye.
Bye.